At dawn the forest held its breath, pine needles stiff with frost, the ground pale as bone beneath a sky that had not yet chosen a color. A boy moved through it with the patience of someone who had learned not to rush hope. He was 14, though the numbers sat on him like borrowed clothing, too loose in places, too tight in others. His boots were cracked at the toes, the leather long past arguing with water. Each step made a small sound, a measured scrape, as if he were asking permission from the land. He carried everything he owned in a bedroll tied with twine. A tin cup knocked softly against his hip. When he stopped, the forest did not rush to fill the quiet. It waited. The boy did too. He had learned that stillness could be a kind of shelter if you stood inside it long enough. Somewhere behind him, the road lay empty, dust settling where a door had closed without ceremony the night before. No one had raised a hand. There had been no shouting to remember later, just a sentence delivered like a bill come due, and the boy had nodded as if agreement were easier than resistance. He had slept in the hayloft once more, then left before the rooster could give him away. Pride had been packed alongside hunger. It weighed less, but it cut deeper. He walked west because the sun rose there last, and because the forests were thicker, and because horses lived where fences met trees. He knew horses. He had brushed their coats until his wrists ached, felt their breath warm his palms in winter, listened to the soft grammar of hooves on dirt. He had learned that animals spoke plainly if you kept your mouth shut. Men were harder. Men hid their meanings under talk. By the time the light slid between the trunks like thin milk, he reached the edge of a clearing used by no one in particular. An old fence leaned there, wire slack, posts gnawed by weather. He sat on a stone and drank from the tin cup, the water tasting of iron and leaves. His hands shook only when they were empty. When he worked, they steadied themselves, as if labor were a language they trusted. He planned his days with care. A ranch downriver might need help mending. Another would turn him away without meeting his eyes. He would take the long route through the trees to avoid the town, where names traveled faster than people and mercy came with conditions. He had learned that routes chosen for quiet were not always shorter, but they were safer. That morning, something disturbed the pattern. It was not a sound that announced itself. It pressed in around him, a wrongness more felt than heard, like a thread pulled where it did not belong. He lifted his head and listened. The forest resumed its ordinary business, a jay complaining, a branch settling, wind moving low. The boy waited. Then it came again, a strained exhale, measured, patient, as if counting time. He stood. The ground under his boots was soft with rot, forgiving. He followed the pull of it, angling away from the path he knew. Light thinned. The smell changed, metal beneath sap. He stopped once, thinking of work, of supper, of the way hunger makes courage look like foolishness. He thought of the door, closing. He went on. As he walked, memory kept pace without asking. His mother's hands, steady when she taught him to braid a mane. A gelding that leaned into his shoulder during a storm. He remembered how trust arrived, not with a flourish, but in increments, like dawn. He remembered because remembering kept him company. It also kept him honest. The forest opened a little, then closed again, and there, tied to a ponderosa with chain that had not known oil in years, stood a horse. The animal did not rear or scream. It stood with the endurance of something that had learned screaming, spent more than it earned. The chain cut a dark line into the bark. The horse's head hung low, mane tangled with burrs, hide dull with neglect. Its breath came out in small clouds, counted like the boy's steps. He did not move closer at first. He let the sight arrange itself. The horse's hooves were raw at the edges, the ground around them chewed to powder. Someone had chosen this place because it hid what it held. Someone had decided that leaving was easier than finishing. The boy felt the decision settle in his chest, heavy and familiar. He knelt where he was. The forest watched. He set the tin cup down and rested his hands on his knees, palms open, a posture his body knew without instruction. He waited for the horse to look at him. When it did, the eyes were not wild. They were tired. He understood tired. He breathed slow and counted with it. The boy could have turned back then. He could have filed the image away with other things that did not belong to him. He did not. He stayed, because staying had once saved him, and because leaving felt like a lie he would have to carry. The chain clinked once, a small sound. The forest did not correct it. The boy reached out, stopped, and waited for what came next. In that pause, he weighed what the land had taught him against what the world demanded. He had no papers, no name that mattered beyond the work he could do before sundown. The horse had no voice anyone would heed. Between them lay a choice small enough to miss and large enough to change the measure of a life. He listened for permission and heard none. Sometimes, he knew, permission was the wrong question. Sometimes the only question was whether you would answer. Morning waited, pale and patient, for whatever he decided to do. He stayed where he was until the horse's breathing slowed to match his own. The forest did not reward the patience with kindness, but it did not punish it either, and that was enough. When he rose, he did so inch by inch, letting the motion announce itself. The horse's ears flicked, one forward, one back, measuring the distance between danger and relief. The chain spoke again, a tired whisper of iron against bark, and the boy stopped. He learned quickly what the animal needed him to learn. He stepped sideways rather than forward, angling so his shadow would not fall across the horse's eyes. The ground here was cold and damp, smelling of old rain. He bent and gathered a handful of needles, letting them slip through his fingers. The sound was small and ordinary. Ordinary things were the safest bridges. When he was close enough to see the crust at the horse's nostrils, he knelt again. The horse lowered its head, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement, as if saying that this was as much as it could offer. The boy spoke then, quietly, not words meant to persuade. He named what he saw because naming steadied him. He said the color of the coat, the scar on the shoulder, the burrs in the mane. He did not promise anything. He knew better than to promise. Promises, like chains, were easy to fasten and hard to live with. The horse shifted its weight and sighed, a long sound that ended in a shudder. The boy felt the sound in his chest. He set the tin cup on the ground and filled it from his canteen, holding it out without lifting it. Water reflected the pale sky. The horse sniffed, then drank, careful at first, then greedy. The boy watched the muscles work, the throat moving. He felt relief and something sharper beneath it. Someone had done this, he thought, and had walked away. He wondered what walking away did to a person if they practiced it often enough. When the cup was empty, he did not refill it right away. He sat back on his heels and took in the chain, the rust flaking like old scabs. The lock was simple, its teeth worn. He had no tool to break it. He had his hands, his time, and a sense that time was already being spent, whether he chose it or not. He stood and paced the small circle the horse had worn, counting steps, measuring the pull. The chain allowed little and took much. He left before the horse could think him gone for good, stepping back into the trees and breaking into a run that burned his lungs. He followed the creek down to the ranch that paid in meals, if not coin. He asked for work without explaining the urgency. The foreman eyed his boots and nodded toward a fence that leaned as tiredly as the boy felt. By noon, the wire was singing straight again. The foreman handed him bread and a strip of salt pork and told him to take a length of rope from the tack room if he needed it. The boy did not say why he needed it. He took the rope and left. By the time he returned, the light had shifted. The horse had not moved. Relief came and went like a wave. He looped the rope around the trunk above the chain, threading it slow, testing the bark. He did not touch the horse. He spoke again, a low murmur that kept time with his hands. He braced his boots and leaned back, letting his weight argue with the iron. The chain creaked. The lock held. He rested and tried again, changing the angle, using patience as leverage. On the third pull, the lock failed with a sound that startled them both. The chain fell away, heavy and sudden. The horse jumped back once, then stood, confused by the absence. The boy did not cheer. He waited. He gathered the chain and set it aside, out of reach, as if it might remember its job. He tied the rope loosely, a suggestion rather than a command. The horse tested it, then stepped forward. The boy stepped back. Space, he knew, was the first kindness. They walked together to the creek, slow and awkward, learning the length of each other. The horse drank deeply. The boy wet his hands and wiped the raw edges of the hooves as best he could. He felt anger then, clean and cold, and he folded it away. Anger made noise. This work required quiet. When dusk began to stitch blue into the trees, he led the horse to a stand of grass and tied the rope where it could not cut. He did not leave. He sat with his back to a tree and ate what he had left, breaking it in half and setting the other half on a stone where the horse could smell it. He watched the animal graze, the head lifting now and then to check him. Night came without ceremony. The boy wrapped himself in his bedroll and listened to the horses chewing slow. Somewhere, an owl counted. He slept in pieces. Near morning, voices carried from far off, men calling to one another, the sound of work beginning elsewhere. The boy woke and felt the rope in his hand, the weight of the choice he had made. He knew this was not finished. He knew the forest kept accounts. When the horse shifted closer and breathed on his sleeve, warm and real, he understood that whatever came next would not be taken back. He stayed because staying had become the shape of his answer. Dawn crept in thin and silver, laying a path he could see at last. He stood, stiff and steady, and touched the rope once more, knowing the forest had witnesses, and that this meeting, quiet as it was begun, changed them both. The boy learned the forest's hours by watching the horse. At first light, he loosened the rope and let the animal choose its circle, wide enough to graze without tearing at the earth. He brought water twice a day, carried in his tin cup, and poured slow, so the horse would not drink itself sick. He cleaned the hooves with a stick shaped to the task, and smeared borrowed salve where skin had split. He did these things quietly, not hiding, not advertising, as if care were a private agreement between him and the ground beneath them. By the third morning the horse lifted its head when he arrived, ears steady, eyes clearer. The change was small, but the boy trusted small changes. He trusted them because they were honest. He had given the animal a name he did not say aloud, a name meant for listening more than calling. He did not believe names were owned. He believed they were lent. The forest noticed. So did people. A trapper passing through slowed when he saw the rope and the boy's posture, respectful and alert. He said nothing at first, only nodded, the way men did when they recognized work done right. Later, at the creek, he spoke. He asked whose horse it was. The boy said he did not know. The trapper did not press. He said there had been talk of animals going missing, then turning up ruined or not turning up at all. He said the talk went quiet when money was involved. At the ranch downriver, a woman who kept accounts watched the boy linger over a ledger left open by mistake. She closed it without scolding and asked where he slept. He told her the truth, which was less a place than a practice. She slid him bread and said nothing more. Later, an old hand with a back bent by years leaned close and said the logging crews up the ridge paid cash and asked no questions. He said they worked animals hard and left them where they failed. He spat and went back to his post. The boy listened and returned to the forest with the weight of what he had heard. He looked at the horse's shoulder and saw, beneath the dirt, a mark burned once and never finished. He washed it gently, counting strokes, until a shape emerged that meant something to someone who liked paper. He felt the system then, like a net cast wide enough to miss what it caught. The horse shifted and stood, patient. The boy felt the patience settle into him. He began to look for proof the way men did who could not afford mistakes. He followed tracks near dawn, measured the cut of hooves, noted where grass lay pressed in lines that led nowhere good. He found a tag snagged on a thorn, stamped with a number and a name that belonged to a company whose wagons rolled heavy through town. He did not confront anyone. He took the tag and folded it into his pocket, where it warmed against his skin. When he spoke, it was to those who knew how to listen. The woman with the ledger knew who kept records when the law pretended not to see. The old hand knew which sheriff's cousin drank where. The trapper knew how routes shifted when eyes followed them. The boy asked questions shaped like observations and waited. Answers came the way water comes to dry ground, slowly, enough to make a difference. The forest pushed back. One afternoon, the boy found the rope cut clean, the horse gone, the ground torn with a struggle. He stood and did not move. He counted his breath until it steadied. He followed the signs, heart low and strong. He found the horse tied again, closer to the ridge, the chain new and bright, the work of someone who wanted to be noticed. He had not free at this time. He marked the place and left, because sometimes staying was the wrong answer. He went to town and stood in the sheriff's doorway, hatless, eyes level. He did not accuse. He laid the tag on the desk and named the brand half-burned. He described the chain and the cut rope and the tracks. He spoke as if he were giving weather. The sheriff listened because the facts lined up like fence posts. He sent a deputy and asked the woman with the ledger to bring what she had. He asked the old hand to speak plain. The boy returned to the forest at dusk with men behind him. The logging wagons stood where the ridge flattened, their loads fresh and heavy. The foreman smiled and stopped smiling when the brand was shown. He spoke of contracts and necessity. He spoke of accidents. The horse stood in the open now, scars visible, breath steady. The boy watched the horse, not the men. He knew where truth rested. Papers came out. So did lies. The deputy read numbers aloud. The woman pointed to dates. The old hand named names. The foreman's voice grew thin. No one raised a hand. The forest listened. The boy felt the weight shift, slow and sure. When the chain was removed again, this time by authority, the sound was final. Night came with a wind that carried the smell of cut wood and the promise of reckoning. The boy stood aside as decisions were made that would outlast him. He felt neither triumph nor fear, only the strange calm of something set right enough to hold. He looked at the horse, free and confused, and knew the end was not yet in sight, only closer, and that staying would be asked of him again. The day the men came, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Dawn stretched thin over the ridge, pale and steady, and the boy walked beside the horse as if the world had not yet learned how to look at them. The animal's hooves pressed into soft earth, leaving prints that might vanish with rain, but would not vanish from memory. He carried only a satchel with water, rope, and a small tin cup he had used for days. He did not need more. The forest already carried what mattered, the quiet proof of care. The men arrived on horseback, not with shouts, but with measured tread. The deputy rode first, a notebook in hand, eyes scanning as though he counted every shadow. Behind him, 2 others followed. Their horses knew the pace of work, and the boy felt a kinship there between creatures who measured distance without asking permission. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, letting the horse pick its place. The deputy dismounted, careful, polite. He asked questions, slow and deliberate, the kind that made a boy speak truth without knowing he was testifying. The boy told what he knew, voice low, precise. He pointed to the scars, the tags, the brand half hidden beneath dirt and burrs. He described the paths, the cut ropes, the movement of wagons and men. He did not embellish. He did not plead. He spoke as one who had watched injustice with patient eyes and knew it would answer only to evidence. The deputy wrote steadily, glancing at the horse as though to confirm the living proof of what had been said. The forest leaned closer, silent witness. A wagon rumbled onto the clearing, late but inevitable, carrying men who had once pretended ignorance. The foreman dismounted, face taut, eyes calculating. Contracts and permits were brandished like shields and excuses like armor. He spoke of necessity, of accidents, of work that could not wait. The boy did not flinch. He had learned that power made noise, truth made none. The horse shifted its weight, standing with the patience of one who had endured too long. Its eyes found the boy's. For a moment, all language fell away. The deputy checked the papers. Names matched brands. Dates matched tracks. The ledger brought by the woman from town laid open the story of transactions that had treated animals as commodities and nothing more. The foreman's voice wavered when confronted with names that could not be ignored, with proof that the law required recognition. He gestured, stammered, then fell silent. The forest took note of the silence, thick and final. Even the trees seemed to press closer, listening. The boy approached the horse slowly, not to claim victory, not to celebrate. He knelt beside it and laid a hand along its shoulder. The horse leaned into him just enough to remind him that trust, once rebuilt, was deliberate and fragile. He touched the faded brand and the scars. The animal had endured more than anyone should. He breathed, counted, measured, and did not speak. Words were unnecessary. Presence was enough. Justice in this place had arrived as patience, not force. The men stepped back. The deputy ordered the chain removed for good. The foreman did so, hands trembling where the iron had once pressed. The chain clinked softly as it fell, an ordinary sound that carried extraordinary meaning. The horse moved forward, cautious, uncertain, yet free. The boy remained kneeling, noting how the animal balanced hesitation with relief. He had seen chains fall many ways, physical, invisible, but this one mattered because it was witnessed, recorded, and recognized. The deputy spoke briefly, the weight of authority in measured syllables. Penalties, fines, the loss of licenses. The foreman swallowed, the papers shaking in his hands. He did not shout, did not strike, did not resist. The law, slow and deliberate, had done its work. The boy watched, and for the first time in a long while, allowed himself a quiet smile. Not triumph, not victory. A recognition. Truth, once gathered, could endure where noise could not. Night fell soft and deliberate. The forest exhaled in wind and shadow. The horse rested near the boy, grazing slowly, unhurried. He sat against a tree, knees drawn close, and looked at what he had helped set right. He thought of the forest at dawn, of the way frost had once lain like a promise across needles and stone. He thought of his own journey through doors closed without ceremony, and of the way kindness, patience, and attention could bridge the distance between helplessness and justice. Weeks passed. The boy returned to the clearing, this time without fear of chains. The horse recognized him immediately, ears forward, eyes bright. He led it to the creek and washed the mud from its legs. The scars remained, but the bruises had faded. He worked slowly, each motion deliberate, shaping care into a routine. He spoke occasionally, soft words about grass, water, and sun, as if language were a balm, not a command. The horse listened. It always did. The ranch offered him a place at last. Not charity, not mercy forced. The foreman, chastened but practical, understood that a boy who could see truth in rust and scar was someone who could be trusted with responsibility. He worked with others, learning not only to mend fences and feed horses, but to measure patience, endurance, and the quiet authority of presence. The boy learned that work could be an act of morality as much as survival. He learned, above all, that responsibility was its own reward. Years later, he returned to the forest at dawn. The land was familiar, yet altered by time and choice. The horse, now grown and strong, waited where he had learned to measure steps and breaths. The boy, now older, mounted carefully. They rode together through light and shadow, the forest watching. Frost sparkled on needles, birds called without urgency, and wind stirred leaves as if to applaud. The journey had not been easy, nor was it finished, but it was steady. It had meaning. The boy, no longer just a boy, knew the lesson the forest had whispered all those years ago. Some truths required attention more than strength. Some kindness demanded patience more than noise. Some bonds, once forged through care and endurance, could survive the weight of neglect, cruelty, and power. And in that understanding, he felt the quiet awe of a life set right, not by chance, not by vengeance, but by deliberate, unwavering presence. The horse nudged him, gentle and insistent. He smiled, letting the reins fall loose in his hands. They walked, hooves and boots touching earth, measured, unhurried together. The forest exhaled. Dawn lit the trees in gold and silver, tracing the paths they had taken, the distance traveled, the obstacles endured. The boy, the man, and the horse shared a silence that was neither empty nor complete, only enough to carry them forward. Some lessons come only to those who stay when leaving would be easier. Some truths are slow to arrive, but impossible to ignore. The boy knew, finally, that endurance without complaint, Attention without expectation and care without condition were powers more lasting than any chain, any law, any contract. And he knew the forest had watched, had waited, had taught him all of it. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts below.